Hey everyone! In today's video, we're taking a look at the Unity game engine, and specifically zeroing in with a little tutorial about scriptable objects, what they are, and we're going to take a look at some examples of how they're used in an example project here. This unfinished food cart app has a working dynamic menu made up solely of scriptable objects. So to start, let's take a look at what they are. We're already dealing with an object-oriented language, so making up a class and assigning variables to it is already par for the course. Unity also already gives us the option of loading up a game object and getting it all set up as a prefab. We could save it into a folder and fire it off later. So with both of those things in mind, scriptable objects are kind of a door to a happy medium in some ways. What we're going to cover here will add new functionality to your right-click menu, allowing you to create a sort of prefab object which is designed to be tweaked, and you end up with a folder of objects that you can more easily alter to your liking. Games like RPGs are great examples of projects where you might need a wide array of weapons, for example. Imagine being able to create a script that can easily create new weapons for your game on the fly, and you can customize the stats you need whenever you like, in a far more organized fashion than some other options. You can use scriptable objects in most cases where you need a varied version of anything. Enemies, armor, or in our case, cheeses and things. Comparing a rusty sword to the Sword of a Thousand Truths, for example, they have more similarities than they have differences. They might have different looks and different stats, but they're essentially different versions of the same thing. And that's what scriptable objects are really all about. In programming, there are often many paths you can reach the same destination with. So this is in part a stylistic choice as well. But you can imagine how much easier you can make things for some teams of developers. Game elements can be altered and tweaked without getting into the actual code, so the artist can comfortably update a picture or something like that. If the data from each object was pulling from a database or something, that would be just as functional, but it's more technical. It may not be ideal for your project. For our example, we're making a list of food ingredients, and we're going to divide those ingredients into groups. The first script we're going to look at is the grouping, and we've called this class CreateIngredient.Group. And starting with what's likely the most unfamiliar looking piece, we're using a UnityEngine function to create an asset menu. This is going to add a right-click function to our folders, and the first variable, groupName, will just be the default name of the object we're creating. The menu name you put here can be set up to your liking, but it's going to be where your new option is located within the menu. The order number system is used to organize things if you want to start adding a number of different menu options. This line of code, whatever script it gets saved in, will run within the Unity editor itself, not just when you run the game. For the rest of the script you see here, everything should look pretty straightforward, with the exception that we're extending a scriptable object class here, not a monobehavior. Remember to change that if you're creating from scratch, as Unity likes to default everything to be a monobehavior. The group we're creating will have a name, sprite-based picture, and a color associated with it. Now we're going to do the very same thing to start creating actual ingredients. We've got a separate script that's very similar, with the exception that ingredients themselves can be assigned an ingredient group, along with a number of other things that associate cost values. Each of these objects will be an instance of CreateIngredient, and that's what we're going to use to refer to the class variables later. Taking a look at how these things work within the Unity editor, we're going to organize ingredients into a separate folder than the groups themselves. And as you can see, we now have the ability to create these items on the fly and populate a huge library of different options. Each change you make is saved and serialized just like public variables, but things here are far easier to manage, organize, duplicate, and so on. Each of these ingredients, or ingredient groups, can be very easily manipulated through menu interactions. You should be able to change names, colors, values, assign pictures, or anything else you decide to set up as public variables in your script. The last piece of code we're going to look at here today is going to push each of these ingredients into a list. Populating the UI from this list would be a separate video altogether, but this is an example of the code that I used to grab each of these ingredients from the folder we designated. And you can also filter for specific search criteria if you're less organized. The first line grabs an array of item names, and then we just iterate through that list, adding each asset. Because we'd already set up the ingredients to hold on to group information, we don't necessarily need to do the same thing for the groups, but that would be just as easy. With what we've done here, we're set up to create hundreds of ingredients, thousands if we wanted, using no further code. Anything added to the ingredient folder becomes part of the list. And since that list drives the UI, the changes are immediate. Balancing things, adding, reorganizing, and many things become much easier. Hopefully those of you who found this video found it helpful. This is a bit of a departure from my regular content, so if you enjoyed this and you want to see more, be sure to let me know. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate your time with me here today. And as always, thanks for watching.